Elephant.
Hello, everyone. This is Data Driven Chat, and today I'm very excited to present Yulia Kosarenko. So Yulia is a business analyst, coach, consultant, author, speaker, and facilitator. She works at Why Change Consulting, and also she's working for Hamburg College, where she will be teaching next term, I believe, starts, right? Hi, Yulia. How are you?
I'm great, Ganna. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks a lot for making the time. I know that you're very busy, and as far as I understand, Why Change Consulting is actually your business. Is that correct? You're the CEO.
I started this business recently. Before that, I was mostly working for small and large companies, but I decided to start my own consulting business and see where it leads me. And also, I'll be teaching the college course in the fall. So it's a new phase for me for my career.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This is the first time we have someone who works in business analytics. So I'm very excited. And so just to kick off our conversation today, can you tell us, so you are working in business analytics, business strategy, and artificial intelligence. How did you become interested in these areas? Can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey? How did you get into these fields?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started with computer science. That's why my background was. And then gradually I got into business analysis because I was really interested in why we are making decisions the way we do. Why are we deciding to change our software and our process, and what's the goal? From business analysis, then my journey went into business architecture because then I was interested in how does a big corporation decide how to invest into different projects? What is the right project to invest in? Which change will give you the best results? And that's where business architecture and architecture in general comes in. That's how you define your strategy for 5 and 10 years down the road. And from there, it was interesting as a business analyst or architect, as you look at the processes, and the old-fashioned way of modeling process was just to go step by step from one activity to another, assess conditions, and then decide where you want to go next. More and more, the trend is that the processes become too complicated to even contemplate a long and big process flow diagram. There is so much data that now you have at your fingertips that those decisions you need to make about where do you want to take the next step is better made based on the data. And I think that's, for me, it really kicked in how important analytics is for business analysis and for managing processes and for improvement. You really need to analyze the data to determine where to go. So to me, it's an extension of being interested in analysis and in making successful changes for an organization using the data and using analytics to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. I think I like how you come from this. I like how you come in at this intersection of these fields from practical side. Just thinking in terms of data availability. Yeah, I guess that's a very important direction, and in terms of advice, like business advice and understanding the complexity, I think it's an exciting field to be at. Yeah. So if I asked you to pick one most important thing that you have done in your career, for those for those people who do not know you, can you tell us? Can you pick this kind of one achievement that you're particularly proud of and tell us about it?
Yes, I can. So 1 year ago, and pretty much exactly a year ago, I published my first book about business analysis. It's called Business Analyst, A Profession and a Mindset. So to me, that was like a culmination of the business analysis part of my career, and the idea of a mindset and how our mindset impacts how we do a great job, and business analysts in particular. That's what really drove me to publish the book. So I'm really happy I can see it out there, and now I'm promoting it. I have webinars, and my coaching is based also on the materials from the book. So to me, that's a big achievement so far.
So can we go a little bit deeper on this one? Can you tell us a little bit more about this concept of mindset and what it means? Just give us like a very brief taster of what you're writing in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So business analysis often is perceived as an IT profession. This is someone who works in technology and writes requirements and does testing and so on. But business analysis always starts with business and how you view business problems. How do you direct everything you do towards solving the business problem or a business challenge? So to me, the mindset is how you look at problems, how you question things, how you understand that every business problem has a human element. And that's the very important part of it. And I remember I used this quote in the book, and I always come back to it. And someone said, no matter what the problem is, it's always a people problem. So we people, we create problems. We create bad data, or we don't use the data correctly, or we make wrong decisions. And that's what creates more problems down the road. So really understanding people and their motivations is part of doing business analysis job.
Mm-hmm. Yes, certainly. I can see what you're saying, and a lot of times, for example, when my team works with businesses, I think the most important stepping stone is to identify the problem statement, and definitely, I think this is where we usually have some issues at the beginning, because sometimes the problems are not formulated in such way that you could directly deploy a team of data scientists to solve them, right? And so that's incredibly important to have that understanding, and to have an understanding how to correctly structure the problem in order for the business to be able to solve it efficiently, right? And that's kind of what your book addresses, as far as I understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. It depends on how you state the problem, and that's already part of your success if you have done it well.
Okay. So tell us, you told us about your achievement. Tell us, what are you currently working on? What keeps you awake at night?
Yeah, so I am working on finishing up the materials for my course that I will be starting to teach in the fall. It's called Introduction to Analytics. And it keeps me away at night a little bit, because I feel like just figuring out what's the right way to teach students for me is a learning curve, because I was mostly a practitioner before and working with a class of students, and most likely working with them remotely in this semester as well. I'm really trying to figure out what's the right way to do it. And also the introduction course on one side could be perceived as easy, but on another side, you need to really give the students a background very wide, starting from what are the business problems, how do you understand the data, what is analytics for, what's prediction, why do we need to predict things. So you're really trying to prepare them for the business analytics program and help them succeed. To me personally, it's a good challenge. It's a challenge, and I'm still working on it.
I think that kind of brings us nicely to the next question I wanted to ask you. So since you're thinking about your course, a lot of people who listen to this podcast are either aspiring data scientists or aspiring analysts, and they really would like to work with businesses. Most of them would like to work with businesses. So can you give some tips to people who would like to get into business analytics? So where do they start? What do they need to learn first?
Absolutely, I can give my perspective to it. I see a lot of articles and books and courses focused on the technical skills. You learn Python, you learn R, you learn Julia, you learn all the new languages. There was a lot of focus on that already. I probably don't need to add any more to that, because that's kind of at the tip of everyone's tongue. But just as I say, with business analysis, the word business is in it for a reason. The same with business analytics. It's the word business means you need to really understand it. You need to understand how businesses make money. Why do they need to measure things? Why do they need predictions? What's the point of making predictions? I think that's the bridge that we really need to create between analytics and data science and the actual business. As one of the challenges in the real corporate world is that a lot of companies started to spend a lot of money on analytics, on creating data lakes, on hiring the best business scientists, but they are not always sure what problems they need to solve. Or they just say, let's just build the data lake and then we'll see how we can use it. And we end up with seeing a lot of money being invested in data science, but not necessarily getting the results out of it. And this is where business analysts and architects and data scientists and everybody who is involved in this needs to really think of the problems that need to be solved and then what data is needed for that and how to formulate the question correctly, and then seeing the actual results of applying business analytics. So really focusing on business and perhaps learning some business analysis too, so that you are well-rounded. You're not just on the tech side, but you can speak to your customers and you can understand what they want business analytics for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had several leading data scientists on this podcast who all mentioned that you do need this skill, to translate the problem into a data science task, and equally, how do you communicate as a data scientist with the rest of the business so that you serve the business, just doing your own thing and business does their own thing. So certainly that's an exciting area. In terms of, so you touched on this a little bit already. So you talked about the importance of data for business, and I just want to kind of go deeper into this question. So why do you think the understanding of data is particularly important for business at present time? And how did, in your opinion, how did the data change the way we think about business in the last few years? Did it change? That's the first question. And if it changed, then how?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the value of data was always there, but with the current development of technologies, especially IoT and all of the social media becoming so influential, with just the growth of big data in the world, I think any business that discounts it or doesn't take it seriously is going to lose to the competition. We see the growth of smaller companies that now challenge the biggest corporations in the world because they're nimble and they're quick and because they know how to use data. So in a way, I would say one perspective, it's a survival. If you don't use the data the way your competitors are starting to use it, you're going to be losing to them because they will be taking away your customers. And that's really what business is about. On the other side is just the amount of data that your products now produce and your business now produces. If you disregard it, then you're not able to make smart decisions. The fast-paced nature of current technology development just tells us that you need to make decisions faster and faster. Like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was perfectly fine to send your data to a data warehouse and then process it. And 3 days later, finally, the business people can see the results in their dashboard. But that's no longer acceptable because the speed with which business people and people in operations roles need to make decisions, the speed with which your customer service group need to have information about the customer, those delays are no longer acceptable. So your latency in the data, you have less and less tolerance for that. If I'm a customer and I call, for example, a company where I have some business, if they can't look up my file quickly, or if I complained about something yesterday and they still don't see it, or they don't know where to find it, then I'm gonna abandon that company. I don't want to be their customer anymore. So our customers have very, very high expectations. And I would say that without managing data in new ways, the organizations are going to start to lose their demanding customers.
Yeah, when you were talking about this, I immediately thought of example of Revolut, for example. I remember hearing about Revolut about a year ago from a student of mine, and then all of a sudden this is the most popular company, right? Because they're so data savvy and they know how to basically approach customers, and they use data in a very creative way. So certainly we can see this shift that you described. But we also know that data is incredibly noisy, right? So there is definitely this problem that you can have a lot of data, but it doesn't really mean much. So how do we go from this noisy data to valuable business insight? Can you give some tips to people who are doing this, who are trying to do this?
Yes. So data is a valuable asset for any organization. So if you think traditionally, what is assets? We say, okay, our real estate is assets, our people are assets, our equipment is our asset, and organizations learn to take care of it. They hire people, they train them, they take care of their real estate, they monitor the equipment, they repair it, they take care of their assets. So we should look the same way at the data. We need to take care of data as assets, starting from the beginning of the data lifecycle. So starting with how we source the data, how it's generated, the data quality starts the very first time you capture something. If you don't capture it right, if you don't capture it in the right place, then there is no data quality down the road. You have already lost it. So starting with really data literacy in organizations, and starting with executive level, appreciating the value of quality data and taking care of it throughout the whole life cycle and monitoring it, that's very important. So in organizations, again, in real life, it always starts with money and with resources. You need to have resources and money to help create quality data. You need to invest in good data. And then you need to teach people the importance of it and how to use it, and set up data governance, and have, again, your business analysts and your business project managers and everybody else to be literate about the data and its importance. The worst that can happen, where you have an analytics group that is crying that the data is bad quality, but they don't have the collaborators on the business side who work with them to really create good data. So I would say it really has to start in the beginning, and it has to be part of enterprise managing its valuable assets properly.
I just have kind of a follow-up question. Can you explain to people what data cycle is? Because there could be some people who hear about it for the first time. I mean, they work with data, but they probably don't think about data life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So if you look at data life cycle, we need to look at where the data starts from or gets born, if you use that analogy, which is really our source systems. So that's when your people enter the data into the system, or you have sensors that collect information, or your internet connected fridge, or your home smart home speaker is picking up all the noises and the word spoken and captures it. So that's sourcing of data. Then the data needs to be aggregated, integrated, stored somewhere in data warehouses and data lakes and different systems where you keep the data and that you will use as sources for using it. Then you use the data. You may use it to manage your business operations, to serve your customers, to send communications, to decide what news to feed to a certain person on Facebook or in LinkedIn. And you really use the data for what you collected it for. You are sharing data, so you may be publishing it through open source, or you're sharing it with your business partners. So you are really propagating and creating copies of the data for different reasons. And then eventually, at some point, you start to think about archiving and destroying the data, because it has a certain life cycle that at some point needs to end. You have certain data retention policies, and at some point you have too much data and you have to clean up, otherwise you're going to be choked on it. So all of this life cycle needs to be managed properly, because you don't want to lose the data. You don't want to have privacy breaches. You need to make sure that you give access properly. And at the same time, you need to make it as efficiently as possible so that all that investment in storing data and integrating it is giving you insights that you can use for managing your business.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you so much for this. And yeah, I think, like I said, people who are probably not familiar with data cycle now have somewhere to start, and probably could read more on the subject. So we've discussed so far your kind of what you do, your career, some important aspects of business analytics, and links between data science and business. Like part of the today, as a part of the today's podcast, I would also like to kind of showcase female talent in artificial intelligence. And you have your own company, and you are in a very male-dominated environment. I mean, we all work in a very male-dominated environment. So I have a couple of questions for you about the role of women in STEM. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about this is, in your opinion, do we have a lack of women in STEM? Because there is some discussion about that. There's some heterogeneity, I guess, by sector. And if so, then why do you think? What are the underlying reasons why we have a low representation of women in STEM?
Yes, so the answer to your first question is yes, I do believe that there is a lack of female representation in technology. And during my career, when I was an architect, I was in definite minority, serious minority. And why? I mean, it's like with every single area where females used to be underrepresented,
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's a cycle that reproduces itself. It's just so I still hear some parents telling their children or their daughters that boys are usually better in math, or boys are better in coding, or it's not a good profession for the girls. So to me, that previous generations that grew up in the world where technology and math was not perceived, a good profession or suitable profession for females, those parents and grandparents are now still propagating those ideas to their daughters and granddaughters sometimes. And we live in this world where we keep hearing about equality and Me Too and the female influence on technology, but it all starts with families. It all starts with school. It all starts with communities. And if regular people in communities tell the little girls something different, or perhaps don't support them as much if they want to go into STEM, that's where it starts with.
Mm-hmm.
Later, absolutely. Later, that's what we see in the workplace. Like you see, for example, mostly sometimes male executives, and the trend continues, but it starts with families. And the difficulty, I know we talk a lot about how fathers take more of an equal share in caring for their children in many countries. It became less difficult for men who want to help with their family to actually do it, because before it used to be, there was a little bit of stigma about fathers who would spend more time with their kids than they should on their career. So it's all around us in this society. I think it's a big societal change that is on the move, but it hasn't happened yet. And we all have to continue talking about it a lot. And perhaps we want to have the male chief information officers look at specifically how can they mentor female leaders. Because again, if you don't want to appoint someone to a leadership position just because it's a female, right? It still needs to be a professional who knows how to do their job, but you need to mentor them. All of that executive power and strengths and knowledge comes also from mentorship, from the opportunities you have to develop those skills. And if you're not given opportunities to develop, then it becomes a vicious circle.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think, what really gets me sometimes is when people say, "Oh, we just couldn't find anyone," because like I think the situation with females is getting better, right? We see that from kind of Fortune 500 list that women are better represented now, but. We just recently looked at the Fortune 500 list, and when we take kind of females as a underrepresented group, it's probably better than it used to be. But if you start looking at other diversity characteristics, like for example, we were looking for women of color, and when we found 3 women of color in the list that was released in 2020, and when we were looking, for example, for Black women, we didn't find any. So like there are 3 women of color currently in the Fortune 500 list, and none of them are Black. And that just tells you how how there is the system is broken somewhere, right? And but in terms of like you started to touch on like what can we do, and I want to kind of zoom out a little bit from women to to generally diversity and inclusivity. So what can we do to increase diversity and inclusivity in tech related industries in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that apart from talking about it and being open and being always mindful of that, I
Yeah, and
think it's very
mentorship.
important.
You mentioned the mentorship program. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think the mentorship is one of the undervalued, but maybe the most powerful tools that we may have. Because as I look back at my career and I think of the places where I used to work in information technology groups, we had a lot of female business analysts, but most everybody else was male. And what I think is a pattern is that the mentorship is usually male to male. It's much easier if your buddies, you don't need to talk about children or schools or the other perceived female problems. And that mentorships, though, it propagates itself because if, for example, a male executive in technology mentoring a couple of junior guys who are also in technology, they will learn from their mentor for sure, but B, they become visible to the executives, so they become naturally the first choices where opportunities for promotion come
Mm-hmm.
about. And again, to become a leader in technology, you need to have a chance to be a manager on a minor level and then a manager in mid-level, and it gives you the chance to grow as a leader. But if you don't get those chances to grow, then it becomes harder and harder. So the mentorship, I think we really need to look at mentoring females. Because again, nobody is a born leader. Nobody is a born technology leader. They all need to grow. So the opportunities for growth really are mostly in your workplace after you graduate from university, because again, it's managing people. It's talking to people. It's figuring out how to manage challenges and projects. And females make good leaders, and we've heard more and more now about the pink leadership and the leadership style. And I used to manage a team that was mostly male. So again, it's not about you being smarter than everybody else in your team. It never is. It's about you and whether you can lead them and whether you can set direction. So I think that females need to have those chances to lead on smaller scale and larger scale and larger scale. And same with representatives or minorities. Same with anybody who is underrepresented. If you don't mentor them, if you don't give them chances, then later someone will say, well, we couldn't find any, but it's a vicious circle again.
Mm-hmm. So so we discussed the diversity and inclusivity issue, and I want to come back a little bit to business analytics again, and kind of address it maybe from a little bit of a different angle. So you already touched on this, and you said, we don't have enough understanding of and skill sets around connections between data science and basically business and business statements and problems, business problems. So in your opinion, how important is the ability to code? And you talked a lot about executives here. So for example, many of my students are executive students, and they're constantly worried, oh, do I need, the technical skills to lead my team? So in your opinion, how important is it? Like, do you actually need the ability to code to be able to engage with artificial intelligence and data science? And maybe some advice you could give to people who are thinking, whether they need to acquire the skills or not.
Sure. So if I can start with the second question about whether you need ability to code, for example, to manage or lead someone, I go back to, I once went to a really good training course. It was called Leadership in IT. And the thing that I took away from that was when our instructor told us, when you're a leader, you don't have to be smarter than everyone else in your team. You don't have to know everything that every other person knows, A, because it's not possible. B, it's not a competition. It's about your ability to lead. You have a different role. So from that perspective, it's not probably necessary to be able to code and know some of the modern languages and be able to just write these complex programs if your focus is, for example, on understanding analytics needs or designing dashboards or whatever it is. For sure, there are some jobs where you need to do it, but it's not necessarily shouldn't prevent you from giving it a try. But I do want to look at it from the other perspective. And again, I think back about how I decided to go into computer science. That was all before PC age. I've never seen a computer in my life. I happened on a book about Fortran in a local library. And that was my introduction to algorithmic languages and to coding. And as I read it, I loved it because it was so structured and was like giving instructions to a machine. It was very basic. But to me, that really was my driver to go into computer science back then. And I think that in the modern age of data and technologies, I think every person needs to understand what coding is at the very, very basic, simple level, and they should not be afraid of it. Because the main problem with the person who doesn't know anything about coding is the apprehension. They're scared. It sounds very complicated. They're like, oh my God, these people must be geniuses. But the thing is that coding, it's very basic level. It's so simple. It's like if you are a parent and you give instructions to your child and you learn early on that you need to give them one instruction at a time when they're young, because then they'll do this one and then you give them the next one. It's the same with coding. At the basic level, you give instructions and then maybe you make it a little more complex and then maybe you tell them to repeat it until the kitchen is clean or whatever, but it's not scary. So I think that's the part of computer literacy and technology literacy and data literacy where maybe we should be teaching coding to everyone in school and then they're just not scared about it. And maybe they will never write machine learning algorithms, but they will know in principle what coding means. And then they can speak the same language with technology. And maybe that will bring business and technology people a little closer together. So my kids, for example, they all do this coding online, our code and all that. It's very simple. They can go do Minecraft coding or their favorite cartoons, but it teaches them not to be scared of it.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and I personally think that we probably need to teach algorithmic thinking rather than coding because. Like in my experience, when I started learning coding, it was, I think, Q Basic or something like this. Now we are on to, like there was then C and C++, and then, a bunch of like Java, like a bunch of other languages and tools. Now we're onto Python. So now, for example, I'm learning Julia. I'm not very kind of knowledgeable about it, but I'm learning it. And I'm guessing that in the next couple of years, there will be something else. So, yeah, and I think what you said is key, kind of not being afraid, right, of trying. Not being afraid of trying is probably the most important thing. Yeah, so we cannot avoid the topic of coronavirus. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, I think it affected everybody uh, in in different ways, of course, but partly it enabled our conversation today because I don't think I would have met Julia otherwise, probably, because Julia is in Canada. I didn't say that, but she's in Canada. We are in the UK, this crisis allowed us to kind of learn a lot and also put a lot of people under a lot of stress, and we have currently a lot of issues. So, economic secondary effects of the crisis are devastating in some countries. So, in your opinion, Julia, what could, basically business analytics, maybe data science and AI, I don't know how you want to approach, like what field you want to pick, but how are the fields where that you are familiar with and where you are an expert, how these fields could contribute to solving the current crisis? And can you think of any particular application or applications where these fields will be particularly valuable in the current state?
Yeah. So, this crisis really made us all think much harder. And in spite of all the difficulties and all the grief caused in the world, I think part that we need to learn from is how we can never predict what is going to happen. There are some things that either unpredictable, or as they say about the pandemics, many people predicted that a pandemic will happen. We don't know when, but people don't listen. Sometimes the organization that perhaps have the power to be prepared, they're not necessarily listening due to political or budgetary or some other considerations. So I think part of the learning for everybody is that you never know when something will happen, but hopefully after this case, we will be learning. But I think in terms of the data science and in terms of analytics, the very important role that the analytics can play is providing unbiased data. So we have seen more and more, even with social media, how sometimes social unrest is supported by social media, information available instantly around the world, and people supporting and providing moral support and financial support. In many ways, instant access to data made many things possible that weren't possible before. So same with pandemic. So with managing all these global changes or large amounts of people that have now grand changes in their lives. So providing this unbiased data and hopefully in open data sources, this is what can show the world how we can use the data the right way. Because one of the challenges, we look historically in different countries and the world wars and tyrannies, where access to information defined who has the power.
Mm-hmm.
If you have access to information, if you can hide it, and if you can use propaganda to bring very different analytics, to the public, and then basically form what they think based on the incorrect data that you're feeding them. That was the power. Now we need to give power to making data open and available to everybody, unbiased, untwisted, not aggregated in the following the rules that someone set, so that we can make collective decisions, perhaps even, you can say as population on the planet. And with the pandemics, it's especially important because if a certain country decides to hide the information for political reasons, but then in the end it starts to impact health of people all around the world, this is where we need to learn from. So I would say open source data and make as many people as possible being able to access this data, and then data visualization. So again, the larger the amount of data, the harder it is for people to perceive what it really means.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen so many data visualizations during the pandemic, and that's what sometimes helps to make decisions. For example, if you really provide impressive visualization that shows you why social distancing works, that perhaps is something that will influence the politicians, or it will influence someone who is empowered to make the decisions.
Mm-hmm. So I would like to now zoom out a little bit. You talked about how data science and AI and business analytics kind of together could help us solve the COVID crisis. But in terms of the challenges and problems that business analytics is facing today, if we kind of take a little bit of a grand view on things. So what do you think are the main challenges in your field currently, apart COVID, obviously?
Sure. So I have to admit, I also am biased, just like everybody else. So I will go with my own bias.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote an article recently about why majority of business analytics projects are still failing today, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a fact that there was a lot of surveys done and research by Gartner, by other organizations, and a lot of failures of business analytics projects or big data projects are the same as failures of any other technology project or many other, and it's human factor. It's communicating, it's not being clear about the goals, about the strategy, it's misunderstanding between business people who think they know what they need and technical people sometimes misunderstanding or not listening. A lot of the challenges of any project, AI including, is really communicating and defining the problems right, and recognizing the biases and then making unbiased decisions. So I think that that's the problem. It will continue to be the challenge because we will continue to be human. We just need to learn to be more open about it and decide how we can deal with it better.
So that would be kind of one problem in the future. What would be other problems? What is maybe not the problems, but what would be the future of business analytics? How will it develop in the next 5 years in your view?
I think that the current COVID crisis and the pandemic will force acceleration in these fields because the world went more online, more remote, more technologically dependent. And this dependency also creates the need for more analytics. And as companies find it harder to manage their businesses remotely or manage their people, or they need to quickly change the distribution channels or the types of products they're providing, all of this, I think, will accelerate the analytics as well. The danger probably is that because of the economic situation, again, the organizations will be so focused on their survival that maybe they will not be able to dedicate as much time to investing into the solution. So perhaps the solutions, implementation may slow down. And I think that the pressure from the startups, the pressure from the fintechs, the pressure from all of the new small, nimble little companies that will now find it even easier to compete with large organizations in the new remote world, because everyone is becoming much more equal. You don't need real estate, you don't need offices in large cities as much perhaps anymore. As you are becoming more online and remote, it's like a more equal playing field, and I think that large organizations will really feel the pinch in that.
Mm-hmm. So we are almost at the end of the interview, and this is the traditional question that I ask at the end. And the question goes like this. If I ask you to recommend one book and one film for people to read and watch, respectively, what would your recommendations be? And I have to say that every single guest on this podcast complains about this question because I asked them to choose just one of each. But yeah, the restriction is you have to choose one of each. So tell us your recommendations.
Okay, I'll follow the rules. So my disclaimer is that I compartmentalize. That's part of how I think. So even with books and with movies, they are compartmentalized. So there are books and movies that I like for pleasure, that books that I listen to when I jog, and then there are books or movies that help me think professionally. So I'll just pick from that category then. And in terms of books, I read this book just this year as I was preparing to teach my course, and it made a big impression on me. It's a book by Cathy O'Neill called Weapons of Mass Destruction,
Mm-hmm.
Mass in Mathematics. And it's really talking about how we are developing the big data and machine learning solutions without necessarily realizing that the bias in the data that we are using becomes even more ingrained as we create this hard to explain algorithms, and how sometimes you can make problems even worse with using machine learning and with making decisions based on this algorithm. So that really, really made a big impression on me, and goes back to, for everyone who works in analytics and big data, you can't just go with data blindly. You need to understand how to interpret it, and you need to constantly make corrections based on your human perceptions and based on those like finer points that you maybe they are in data, but you can't even recognize them, or you can't teach your algorithm to find them. And if you don't see that, then you run the risk that your solutions will continue to be biased, and you will not be solving problems. You will just make them worse.
Right. How about the film?
The film. Okay, I'm gonna now admit that I am sometimes a little bit behind on watching movies
Mm-hmm.
or films on TV. So my kids are still relatively young, and I feel like I'm catching up for a few years. So this TV series is a few years old, but to me, it made a big impression on me. It's called Lie to Me,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about it's actually based on a real character and a scientist that has been studying micro expressions and how to recognize whether someone is lying or whether someone is experiencing an emotion based on very fine expressions in their face and their different parts of their face. And this movie is fictional, and it follows investigations into different crimes or mysteries, and the main way that it's being investigated is watching people's faces, seeing how they react, and then guessing based on that. So to me, it's like another reminder how we are all human, and how sometimes very, very small, seemingly minor details make a big difference. And going back to data, on the surface everything may look, some little micro change somewhere deep down that needs to become an indicator of something we need to pay attention to. And we need to be able to think on a micro level as well, because that's where sometimes we can find answers. So really, a really great TV series. I loved it.
Oh, thank you so much, Julia. Thank you for these recommendations, and thank you so much for finding the time to talk to me today. I definitely learned a lot. I mean, I didn't, for example, know about this book on weapons of mass destruction. I will definitely read it. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned a lot of very important problems, and I think I never thought about mentorship as a tool, as a powerful tool, and you today brought it up to me. So thank you again for making the time, for doing this, and yeah, I mean, good luck with everything that you are doing, and yeah, I hope that the situation will be more favorable towards women in technologically dense environments, and I hope to see kind of more from you, from your work, and hopefully more books. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think one thing that we can do as women is also mentor more women and help others who are maybe on the same path. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. I appreciate you inviting me. Great topics today. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.